Evaluate Year is really this investigation into the program that's currently being implemented and to look at the resources that we're using and examine like what our outcomes are and what things we might want to think about making decisions on to change to make things even better going forward. So and we also try to make sure that everything we're doing is really connected to our district goals, to our school improvement plans. And so having those variety of voices in the room really helps to keep us all kind of on the same page and really thinking through different lenses. So my ELA K-8 vertical team has 31 members and at the K-5 level, and then 14 members at the 6-8 level. And some of the things that we've done in our vertical team is really, we've done a Hopes and Dreams activity, which really we connected with Brad, who's actually our social studies teacher on special assignment. But we had him come and do this Hopes and Dreams activity with us, just around like what are the things we hope for our kids? What are the things we'd like to see change? What are the things that are working well? And we came up with some things that we shared with the committee when we met with them. We also reviewed this evaluation matrix, which is clearly called out in the document that guides our work. We've gone through all the components and really looked at our data. We've broken it down, and then we've determined what are the strengths in the things that we're doing and what are some of our challenges. So the relevant data that we looked at were New York State assessments, which, by the way, have changed almost annually for ELA over the last 5 years, making the data very difficult to look at and hard to compare to previous years. So that was really a challenge. However, we can look in comparison and see how our students performed against other districts in our area, the BOCES, the state levels, and we're comparable. K-8, we also looked at our data that we collect consistently for our kids, or our benchmark data. So those are the things that kind of like keep us dipping in and just saying like, how are kids doing? So we used our iReady data. We used our independent leveled reading assessment in that independent leveled block. So the iReady assessment is really more of a computer-based assessment where students are interacting with a computer to determine their level of proficiency, where the independent leveled reading assessment is formative. I'm sitting with a student, I'm taking some information, I'm determining where they are as a reader, so that we're not just assessing kids using computer-based information, but we're also having those conversations with our students to really determine where they are. So that reading inventory is at the 6-8 level, and that is more of a computer-based assessment as well. We also took a look at the assessments that we created to go with our modules, and those are common formative assessment data components we looked at. We had a survey go out to all of our teachers. So part of the charge for the committee was to develop a survey to find out what are the things that are working well for teachers, what are the challenges that we might be having, and where might we spend some time looking to improve. So we had that teacher survey, and then as well as the feedback from the committee. So in looking at all of that, we identified some strengths, challenges, and implications for instruction, and as well as next steps as a committee. And so some of our next steps as a committee are going to be to really dig into the state documents. So we've kind of done this internal peek at like, what are we looking at? Now we need to like look at the state website, take a look at the documents that are supposed to guide us towards making sure that we have curriculum in line with state expectations. So we'll be doing that at our next meeting. And then we will also be thinking about creating a rubric that we'll use to lay over any curriculum that we might get, right? Vendors are super excited to find out we're looking, and they're all like starting to they want to date us right now, right? They're like, hey, can we come? So when they come, we need a rubric that anchors us into like, here's the things we really need to have, and it'll help us have some common language to share with them as well about what we're looking for. So I talked ahead a little bit. Here are those things. The other thing that's going on is that we will be doing some research around best practices, and that's typically done through our conferences. So there are a group of folks that are going to be going to the state. We'll go to the state reading conference this year, and actually we're presenting at 2 of the sessions, which is ironic. But we're very excited to be able to have that opportunity to go there. We'll review those state documents, like I said, as well as pilot any new resources. So we do have a couple pilots going on with resources that are connected to that independent leveled reading assessment through the American Reading Company. And we have a few teachers they're going to be on a panel, and we're going to have the team interview them and just find out how things are going using those new resources in those classrooms. At the 9-12 level, because they've kind of already gone through this process and they have their standards identified for priority standards, and we have determined like where those lay out in the year, the thing that the 9-12 folks really wanted to focus on was more around the senior project. So annually, we have senior projects going on. Students are reflecting back on their time in Greece, and they're really putting together something that really showcases the growth that they've made over time. And so what we talked about this year over the summer was using a more consistent rubric across the 4 campuses and having our projects now be all electronically formatted. COVID has really moved us into that electronic age, which is nice, because then the kids have something that they can take as they move on forward beyond Greece. We also are trying to include more stakeholders in the process. So we want more community members and parents and board members involved with these conversations when the students present their projects. As well as identifying some essential questions. So schools were asking different things for kids, and we just thought, you know, we should have like an anchor of questions. We used to have 4, we said 3 is probably plenty. It really gets to the relevant information that we want kids to showcase. So the other exciting thing about our senior project information is now it will be included in our course catalog. Really trying to showcase more for just the community and parents what the idea of that project is.
So thinking a little bit more about our seniors and what we want our graduates to have. You know, in the last 20 years or so, there's been this big push for going to college, but we've tried to create a little bit more of that balance. And the career pathways in Greece, to me, is a really unique opportunity. I know sometimes in Greece, our size sometimes can be a hindrance. This is one of those unique things that our size really generates lots of opportunities. I think of this almost like a mini WMOCO or BOCES, where our students, you know, they still do their Regents requirements, but within Greece, they can choose pathways to go get specific classes and trainings that is going to prepare them for employment or additional career training or even college right after high school. Some of those ideas are like responding to emergencies is a strong pathway we have in Greece. So our students get classes in responding to emergencies. They partner with our local first responders, and they come out ready to go right into that field as they exit high school. We have culinary, where students are getting certifications in, you know, knife skills and food preparation and these kinds of things. And so it's a continuous project. We're trying to build up these things, but this is a unique opportunity where we get to tap into the fact that we're a large district and really tap into those resources that we get to do. So to me, it's an exciting opportunity that, you know, not all kids take the same path. Some are going to college, some are going to careers, and different tech skills, and this allows for those opportunities within Greece without having to go outside of that. So this last time we shared a little bit more about that, and so Corey Skinner is our Director of School to Career Pathways. And one of the exciting things is, you know, engagement. Coming out of COVID in the last few years, how do we engage kids? And the national averages, you can see there, if they engage in these CTE programs, their graduation rate goes way higher than if they're not. So this is something that we hope to hold our students near and dear and give them something that they're passionate about. So in our last DCC meeting, we shared just a focus on a couple of them. And one of them is our pre-engineering pathway. And so we have just created an advisory board for that. And our advisory boards has community members, businesses, teachers, and people throughout the area to kind of come together and make recommendations about how can we make our pre-engineering pathway strong and support our students. So we've applied to New York State for official certification. We're partnering with MCC so students can get dual credit. And we have a variety of work-based experiences. So kids not only beyond taking classes, they can get out there and get real life experiences. And some of those are as simple as like Greece gadgets. They go around Greece within our schools and they fix things. They fix our Chromebooks. They fix our things that like no one has time to do. And so they're getting that hands-on experience within Greece. And we're trying to expand that. That's the great thing about the advisory board as we partner with our local businesses. They're inviting us in, and they want our students to come to them to really work at their businesses to get those real life experiences. So we're working on building that up. And the other one we shared on just recently is our culinary one. We have some exciting teachers who are coming in from the industry, chefs who are coming in and teaching our students. And same thing, we have that advisory board really kind of making recommendations about how to make this a powerful pathway for students and trying to expand those work-based learning opportunities so they can really get out in the community, work in businesses and high schools, and be prepared to move forward with if they want to just go get a job or if they want to go to further education. so they're ready for that next stage wherever life is taking them. And those were some of the things we shared at our DCC this last month. Any questions?
Vice President Moore?
As a former work-based learning coordinator, I'm glad to see that's back in phase again. That's thrilling for me, and I'm happy to see it. Senior projects, electronic, formatted, and presented. Does that mean they're going to present to you electronically, or are you still going to sit down and do the one-on-one?
So the kids will still do a formal presentation to a
Okay.
panel, but we had some folks who were still creating like more in a scrapbook format. And we just said it should really be more technology savvy at this point, because we're trying to get kids to really experience what it's like to present, kind of like I'm doing right now, right? How do we
Absolutely.
use the presentation to kind of help showcase some of the things that we're talking about, that I want to communicate to you. So the presentation might not say every word, and helping kids really sort that out. And that's a lot of the guidance that we give them when they're creating those electronic presentations.
Well, and that's a great skill. But
Yeah.
I still like the one-on-one. And don't
Yes.
forget to invite board members
Yes,
to be.
and we put that in our guidance now, so.
Thank
It's
you.
official. You're welcome. It's another thing to volunteer for.
Mrs. Flores?
Thank you for the information on this. I'm curious about our students. So many of our committees these days, we're inviting our students to come and add their opinions on what's going on. And with the curriculum, I would definitely think that student feedback would be really important to understand, what do they like? What do they resonate with? If we're looking to ignite learning and get them excited and passionate about things, we need to definitely hear what's going on with it. How is that getting incorporated in what we're doing right now?
So I can speak to our math program review process. When we were piloting various programs, we interviewed students live, and we just asked them questions like, how do you feel about this? How engaging is it? Is it captivating you? Are you learning you? Is it supporting you in your different things? So right through that program review process, we are surveying teachers, and we have a whole rubric to evaluate things, and part of that is usability for teachers, but there's a whole section for usability for students. And so we rate it on a whole bunch of different categories for that, and part of that includes interviewing students to get that information.
And I'll just add that for the senior project information, we sent out a survey to students who had completed the senior project last year, and we used that as a springboard for our conversation. So students did have input around that. The pilot that's going on right now with the American Reading Company resources, I've gone into classrooms and just said to kids, how's it going? How do you like your learning this year? And I've had some really candid feedback from the students around what they like and what they don't like. So it's fantastic to go in to talk to, 6-year-olds and 10-year-olds about their learning, and it's really insightful, right? So if we just are quiet and listen, they're very insightful about what they like and what they don't like and the ways that they enjoy learning. So those interviews are less formal, but they're going on.
Any other questions? Oh, Ms. Farah, sorry.
Just have one quick question with the relevant data. We did all the surveys. Can you give us a little bit more feedback on what responses you got? Good, bad, and different? Anything that you saw besides?
So for the teacher survey that we sent out,
Any one of them?
okay, so I would say the students were mixed around the senior project, right? It's their senior year, and some of the students really appreciated the opportunity to reflect back on their senior project, while others were just like, I'm not sure why I'm doing this. I feel like I'm done, and they do feel like they're done by the time they get to the end of the year sometimes. So we had some information from the survey around that. The teachers, we had a lot of information around, and this would be more at the K-8 level. We had surveyed the teachers around the senior project as well and just how that goes for them. I would say our ELA department feels like they own a lot of that, and we're trying to figure out how do we get more people to own kind of preparing kids for that reflection time so that they're not just reflecting more on their ELA work that they've done throughout the years, but really more as a human being, like what are the things that have really engaged me in school. So Corey and I are actually partnering with, looking with different companies around how can we kind of help kids start during their 7th grade year, collecting some information and data and things that they might use when they get to their senior portfolio. And I think now, using the technology, we'll be able to track some of that a little bit better for kids. As far as the teacher surveys in the ELA K-8 component, We had folks who enjoy what we're using. It is kind of all over the place, right? You have people who really like what they're doing and don't want anything to change, and then you have people who are ready for a change. And really, a lot of the survey questions too were around like communication. How do you get your information? When you have a question about something, do you feel like you know who to ask? So we're checking also our processes and how we communicate with teachers, and, creating that instructional learning network that we talked about this year is providing more opportunities. And some of that was based on the information that Todd got when he did his math vertical team. So we have that as well. So we asked about, like the types of resources they want to use, the things that are going well in their rooms, and the things that they may want to have changed. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you both. Moving on to 4.02, Phoenix update. Assistant Superintendent Zaffetz. It's like magic.
All right. Good evening, everyone. About a year ago, we came in front of the board to kind of kick off a extended project at Phoenix Academy in partnership with the University of Rochester. And we're here to come and give you the results of that self-study, which took about 8 months. So I'd like to invite Dr. Baker up and Dr. Kwaku O'Connor from University of Rochester.
Do I start? I'm happy to start. Okay. Thank you so much for having me back. Great to see many of you again. It was about a year ago that I stood in front of you in a different building and started talking about the study, and we were just about to launch. The purpose of the study was really to understand the factors that led to the success, like the academic success of the students at the Phoenix Academy, and also capture the unique value that Phoenix Academy has within the districts, really trying to capture the perceptions and experiences of the students and the families and the staff who are there. We also wanted to capture the needs and the perceptions of the district of Phoenix Academy, and I just want to thank everybody for giving their time and their honest feedback. I recognize so many of you who are part of that process, so thank you. One of the things that we also wanted to do was make sure that the staff at Phoenix Academy were really engaged and involved with this process. So throughout the time of the study, we would bring back information, we would have focus groups, and one of the things that we what they identified as a need, as a purpose for the study was really targeting and finding areas of improvement. So that last little piece really came from the staff at Phoenix Academy of wanting to make sure that we would address that as well. Our approach was going to be driven by questions, using systematically collected data and analyze the credible evidence. We wanted to engage in dialogue with people who are all the different stakeholders and really be transparent about what we were doing. These are the questions that we asked. What are the factors that lead to students' academic success? What are strengths and values of Phoenix Academy? And what role does Phoenix Academy play in the larger central school district? We had students, focus groups. They were some of my favorite pieces of data that we collected, the surveys, family surveys. Phoenix staff participated in focus groups and also surveys. And then we did a lot of interviews and focus groups with the district staff. I also spent about, there are about 3 of us who spent about 8 months, once a week or so in the building, observing classrooms, playing volleyball with the kids, and so that was some of our data as well. We also looked at existing data in terms of academic records. Thank you so much, Kathy, for getting that all together. And then we wanted to review the literature in terms of successful alternative learning programs, what the literature says around that. Do you want to go into that?
So just a little bit more about Phoenix Academy. There are a few different programs that are housed over in the building. So one is an actual program where students are referred through the response to intervention process within each building. So there's a referral that's sent through, and we review that to make sure that interventions have been in place and that it really is a good fit for the program. And then there's also a GED program over there where students are preparing for the GED exams. And then there is a re-engagement program over there that is primarily for students that are on short and long-term suspension. So when you're looking at who's over at the program, you'll see that there's various grade levels in terms of who's actually referred over to the program. So when you're looking at that, you'll see a little note on the side that says not included in that data, because those are more transient students, right? You might come, prep for a GED, you take the exam, you leave, or you're there for a certain number of weeks on suspension, and then you're returning back to your home school. Whereas, while enrollment of the actual program at Phoenix Academy may fluctuate over time, it is more consistent. So there might be referrals that are coming in throughout the year where we're adding students, but they're not coming and going in the same way that other programs are within the building. So any of our schools can refer to the actual program of Phoenix Academy. This is just a breakdown of, again, this is last year's information. This looks slightly different. And COVID has impacted who's been referred over time as well. So prior to the 1920 school year, there were more middle school students that were present, and that we were actually working to try to build that. And then with the COVID shutdown, it's been difficult to sort of build that back up again. So that is something that we're taking a look at and trying to examine, is there just really not the need, or is there something else that's happening because of that interruption in time? This is another breakdown of the gender identity of students that are within the program, which is just interesting to see when you're comparing who is represented at Phoenix Academy versus the general population. So there is more males that are represented of who gets referred to the program versus the overall district. And same thing, and when you're looking at race and ethnicity, pretty comparable, but, some variation. When you're looking at students with disabilities and economically disadvantaged, you'll see that there are more students represented at Phoenix Academy in those two categories, which is important to think about when we're talking about need within the program and who they're serving.
Talk about this. I'm actually going to skip one slide ahead and just talk about the unique value. I'll go back to the factors that lead to success. The unique value of Phoenix Academy, really the story here is that students talked about how it gave them another shot at life. There were so many students who talked about if it weren't for Phoenix Academy, they would probably be dropouts, or they would be in juvenile detention. And so this was not just, 2, 3, 4, 5 students, but this was a consistent theme throughout. And it could have been for numerous reasons that students decided to sort of disengage from school initially. One of the students had talked about how they had been out of school for almost 3 years. And so there was no way they were ever going to go back to school. They weren't going to be able to catch up. There's no way. There was a lot of shame around it. But when they knew that Phoenix Academy was a place where they could go, they would be welcomed. There was no shame. They said, you're here now. We're going to start with where you are, and we're going to work on it together, and you can do this. And there are a lot of students who just really flourished once they got there. So it really reignited students' hope for their future. It really is a place where students felt like they nurtured their whole selves. So they said, it's not just about doing well academically. They really care for my well-being, my health, my mental health, my social relationships with other students here. They really tried to help me with that. I used to be so shy, so anxious, and now I'm like an extrovert here. So that was a real, shift in perception for them. It was a safe space for students. It was a place where people felt like they really belonged. So that also meant that when they were not there, then when they showed up again, they said, hey, where have you been? They were missed. And so that was a really key part for them, that people didn't just forget about them if they didn't show up. And it really helped them. This is one of the things that students says, that when I do my work at Phoenix, I can see it in my grades. And that gave them a lot of hope, that putting in some effort was going to actually help them feel like they're making progress. So, And really, a lot of it was around, fulfilling the role of public education, really helping students have access to education, no matter what their life circumstances are, no matter how many times they may have stumbled, no matter how many times they may have been rejected in different places. This really was a place where people could come together. So those are some of the unique values that we were able to capture. These are sort of the survey results from the students. 96% of the students there say that teachers care about them. And then, you can look at this, I won't read all of them, but 93% of students can talk to teachers about problems they're having in class. This is really important because in schools, it's not so much whether or not students are going to have a problem, it's if they're going to have a problem, but when they're going to have a problem. And when they have problems or challenges, are they able to have a strategy of addressing that? And so having this many students be able to feel comfortable talking to the teachers about it is really key, because that is not something that they talked about in terms of at their home school. They felt like the teachers had a lot of other students to attend to. They felt really shy. They didn't, so these are some of the results from the survey. Okay, I'm going to skip back, like I said, to the factors that lead to success. So we asked, students, staff, families, district people, so what is it about this place that students come and then flourish after, having been disengaged? And said that there were about 14 concepts that came about, and we categorized them into these 5. So environment, I have to look at my notes really quickly. So environment really was around small classrooms, the small school feel, nobody could sort of go under the radar. The sense of safety was really important, because we know that to be able to learn, you can't be in this fight or flight mode all the time. In terms of the relationships, that came up over and over and over again. And it's not just the relationships that students felt they had with their teachers. They really felt like the teachers cared, but also there was a teamwork atmosphere where when an environment is in crisis or there's a lot of trauma, teams can actually fall apart and blame each other, or come together and really support each other. And Phoenix Academy, everybody there talked about how we are here, we want to be here, and we're committed to each other. It's a student-centered place. There's a lot of flexibility. Again, with kids being absent and coming back, they start right where they need to be. There's a lot of differentiation and one-on-one attention. In terms of the instruction, every instruction is really infused with social emotional learning. That was a big piece that the teachers talked about. And also having sort of this teacher autonomy in being able to customize sort of the approach to students, knowing that each student learns differently. It says logistics is sort of like the processes. It was important that scheduling was really intentional, because students had different schedules, whether they were already working and then had to sort of adjust, or knowing that kids weren't going to get up early all the time, so making sure that they would be coming in the afternoon, having opportunity to learn in the afternoon. Also looking at the student profile and making sure that it was going to be a good fit was an important piece. Students actually talked about the quarterly review, that they felt like that quarterly review that they do in terms of what they have done, what they still need to do, and what they need to do to get there was really critical to them, so that they knew where they were in their path to success. Okay. So in terms of the district need and perception, again, thank you very much. There were some things that I think that it was really interesting to hear, because as Christine was talking about in terms of the different programs, when we talked about Phoenix Academy, there were sort of these different perceptions, but we weren't ever really clear on which program people were talking about. So when we talked about Phoenix Academy, some people were referring to it in terms of the long-term suspension program, and then some of the social emotional learning program, and some of them with a GED program. Having some consistency in the referral process and enrollment requirement may be very helpful. And Christine will talk a little bit more about what's been going on since we've done the study. In terms of the transition plan, there's some onboarding that happens, but there hasn't really been offboarding. So how do students transition back to their home schools, and having an intentional plan around that. could be an opportunity for the students' success as they potentially go back to their home schools. In terms of the partnership, communication between the homeschool and Phoenix Academy was something that was desired from both sort of parties. And so having that, I think, would be really helpful. I know there's one school who sends a social worker to Phoenix Academy every week to check in on all the students, and the students said, I don't feel forgotten when I'm there. There's somebody at my homeschool who still cares, and I know that when I go back, I can talk to that person. And then there was some question around the rigorous instruction. It wasn't very clear what we meant by rigorous instruction, but one of the things that was sort of a wondering was, is 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours enough in terms of learning? And at the same time, we can talk about these students in terms of not having attended school. So rigorous instruction could be happening in the home school, but they might not be in the seat to engage with it. So at Phoenix Academy, they were getting a lot of one-on-one attention to be able to have that concentrated time to learn. Do you want to talk about the challenges and barriers?
So some of the themes that emerged in terms of some challenges were sort of on the opposite side of what people wanted. So as was just shared, that both the homeschool and Phoenix Academy were seeking more communication between the other, because with 6 different secondary buildings, everyone sort of has their own processes, and then what is Phoenix's processes? So that's definitely having a consistent process will be important going forward. Addressing the mental health needs of the profile of students that are attending and making sure that those needs were addressed. There is some physical needs within the building itself, and some of the barriers that come with that. While it's really nice that they're in their own building over at Elcott Road, there isn't a cafeteria. There's some limitations with just the building itself. And so students' number one complaint is around the lunches and how they come over. And so that's definitely been a theme over the years in trying to work with food services to problem solve some of those needs for students that are over there. Having other various partnerships with outside community agencies is definitely a need and opportunity. And so we definitely have some things in place for this year based on this that we will share. And the public's perception has been something that we've worked on over time, and both internally and externally. So the program before it was Phoenix, it's gone through a journey of bridges or the re-engagement center, and then sort of a merging of both. And so it was rebranded as Phoenix Academy, really to have its own Greece type of logo, for one, and to have their own identity. That came from students when that was rebranded, but also that we want students to feel like proud of the fact that they're going there, and that it is its own identity, and that is a program that they attend, and making sure that we're keeping up how we're talking about Phoenix even internally within the program, and the things that we're all saying, and holding each other accountable to that. So we also talked about how do we balance the idea of a alternative learning center, but also the rigor. And so that's definitely a challenge and a barrier, and making sure that we have clear, consistent code of conduct expectations that while we're over there, but also making sure that there's some uniqueness to that, because we want to make sure that we're meeting their needs and that there is some flexibility in order to make sure that everyone is and is successful within the program. Attendance is definitely still something that is being targeted within the program, and we'll talk about some next steps that came from what we learned to address that. So in terms of opportunities, I've sort of shared some of these, so I won't go through all of them again, but some of these opportunities we have made into some next steps, so I will speak to those specifically, just to not be redundant. So currently, we have a new assistant director that's starting on Friday, Rachel Hawkins, who's here with us tonight. So we're really excited to have Rachel come in and to sort of be thinking about some of those structural changes to help address some of these. So not everything has an action step, but certainly that's one thing that we want to have consistent communication with when we're talking about re-entry back in. So we've spent a lot of time, especially with the Peer Accountability Council and some new things that are happening in some of our buildings to think about how would we pilot this to then expand to the larger, all of the six secondary buildings. That we have some new community schools resources that are attached to the program now. So that includes not only a community schools coordinator, but we also have agencies such as the Villa that we're partnering with to address some of the substance abuse usage. We have a Center for Youth partnership over there with a social learning specialist to support with some, addressing crisis and re-entering back into classroom. We have Hillside that's over there now to help with college and career pathways. So definitely have expanded the resources that are available. Previous to that, none of those things existed, so that we're really excited to see how that will impact some of multiple areas that we've talked about in terms of attendance, focused interventions, addressing the mental health. So a lot of those resources are sort of new, and we're still figuring out how to use them. And with having a new assistant director come in, I think a lot of these things will come into place as we think about, Rachel thinks about her entry plan into the program and thinking about all of the moving parts that we'll kind of pull together for a plan. Anything I'm missing that you were hoping I would say?
I just wanted to add to, the kids are really perceptive. They know that Phoenix Academy, their reputation in the community, and there's oftentimes this feeling of double victimization where, the traditional structure has sort of not worked out for them, and then they go to this place that actually works for them, but there's this reputation they feel. And so I think as adults, and as leaders, I think we need to make sure that we prop up this place and make sure that we sort of reaffirm the kids' efforts and their re-engagement in the place. And so I think that's it. There's one more thing, but I can't remember.
So any questions?
I just have two. Oh, you have one? Sorry, I missed you. Go ahead, Mr. Swicki.
Just a question on the opportunities where you labeled, I think, inconsistencies in understanding both the referral process and, what Phoenix Academy constitutes, right? They're probably related in some way, but I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that. What are you learning from that, and what's kind of next steps in that particular space?
Yeah, so part of this is that there was a new referral process that rolled out last year that previous to that was sort of more informal, which was good and bad in terms of we really wanted to make sure that Phoenix Academy felt like a place that's like, it's an honor to get into this program, that there's a referral process and that there's a standard when we're having, because there's only so many spaces. It's a small program, there's only so many teachers, and so enrollment is limited in terms of space. And so the other part of that was also around response to intervention processes and trying to make sure that just like when we refer to special education, that we're doing our due diligence within buildings and that it isn't just this feeling of wanting to sort of have this kid just leave us and that we aren't really investing in them. So when anything's new, there's always some growing pains around that. So that's part of it, but also clarity, I think, around some of the things that were mentioned around what is the actual program's profile? Who are we looking to refer to the program? And part of that really is that it's not a behavior program, it's not a special ed program, it's really a profile of students that might have anxiety, that might have struggle with attendance, and might be credit deficient. And so those are the sort of being clear and laying out some of those look-fors in terms of the profile that we're looking for the program.
That's great. Thank you.
Mr. Bongorio.
Thank you for that really good information there. I want to tie two pieces together. One, the unique value that you identified of Phoenix being a safe space for students, and just a few things here. So many students see, can connect with teachers apparently very easily, which is wonderful. I guess that's one way that they see a safe space, but what else? How, in what sense does Phoenix provide a safe space
So one of the things that was actually really interesting is that the students really felt like the other students respected them, and they did not feel respected in their home schools. And they felt like other students in the larger buildings didn't really understand that not everybody's life was the same, and didn't really understand why some kids may have been the way that they were or acted the way that they were. They did not feel understood, whereas when they went to Phoenix, there was a sense that everybody sort of had an understanding that we're all going through stuff, and we'll all just be gentle with one another. I mean, they really, really they showed so much grace to one another. It was unique, and I go to a lot of buildings, and it was actually incredibly unique to see how graceful they were with one another, even if somebody may have, had an outburst or kept doing something that probably tested people's patience. They were really, really graceful with one another, and I think that's one of the things that they just know. I'm going through stuff, I know you're going through stuff too. That really stood out to me too. So I think that might answer some of your questions around safe spaces.
Dr. Trewick?
So I have more of a comment. I'm the board liaison for Phoenix Academy, and I had the opportunity to tour about a month ago. And I'm so glad for some of the things that you brought to light in terms of, how the culture is really changing and some of the concerns students shared. I'd like to see us, many of the things I heard were the same things when I went to visit, and I hope that we can start to make more of an investment in the building structure itself. The staff talked about the lunches. That's important that they don't have a lunchroom. But also, they're doing some great things over there. They have the only, I think, hydroponic garden that is in the wall. It is amazing. And the students, they developed the plans for it, are putting this thing together. I haven't been over to see the finished product, but it was just an amazing project. And they're also, they have their own garden. And some of those fresh fruits and vegetables that they're growing or fresh vegetables they're using for their lunch, but they also need more space and expansion. And I think when we talk about, because almost sounds like what we're talking about might be a rebranding as well of that, and how we talk about it and think about it might, I would like to see us put some financial investment behind that as well.
Ms. Farah?
Thank you. I'm going to actually go off of yours, Dr. Trewick, and what you said. Are we looking to expand? This sounds pretty good. And what is the teacher to student ratio for this? I mean, I think that we could probably, I know that there's a way that we have to get in, but I think this would be great for a lot of the students that are already in these classes out of the high schools that may be able to use this if we expanded it. I think that's a great idea. So I don't know if you can answer any of those questions in there, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, there is quite a bit of resources that are sort of used towards it, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect. I think it's a matter of looking at what is working and where the gaps are. So I think that's part of what we're curious. This was part of a way to look at where can we fill some gaps, and we've added some new resources. So now I think we have to give it a little bit of time to then just continue to see where are the gaps. But there is space limitations just right now within the program. So really looking to expand would require a whole nother sort of set of conversations. But we do want to maximize the enrollment in terms of what we have space for. We want to make sure that we've filled the seats. You saw in that chart of grade level, we're very top heavy in terms of when students are being referred. They're in 11th and 12th grade primarily. We would love to fill those seats at the younger ages, which is why I mentioned filling those middle school, 9th grade seats. And so that's more of what we're trying to look at. It's okay, we know that there's need out there. How do we fill those seats at the younger ages, at least at a minimum, where there is some space to fill there?
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Bonagoro?
I had a similar question, so thank you for that answer. You divided, you kind of said there's 3 groups, students there for GED, long-term suspensions, and SEL. When we did the surveying of the students, did you get representation from each of those groups? Were any of those groups maybe harder to get responses from? And what did that look like if you did?
The SEL program is really where the surveys were, but the focus groups, we did with all of them. Like, we had stories where Miss So-and-so saw me at Walmart and said, you have to come back, you have to come to this GD program, and that's why that person was there. I mean, it was, there was representation across in terms of when we talk about the themes that came out, caring. There are kids who are in the long-term suspension program who said, how can I get into the social emotional learning program? Because this is a safer environment for me. And so that was also really interesting. But I think it is confusing from the outside in, thinking about Phoenix Academy as all of these different programs, not realizing there are all these different programs serving the different students, so.
Mr. Bonagoro?
To continue on that, we know that, I'm thrilled that it's a safe environment for them, and they seem to be flourishing. At least it sounds that way. It sounds like making more use of this program can also assist in making the other schools safer environments, because in some, I've been hearing things where, there are, I'll say, students who maybe don't feel safe, but other people are feeling not safe as a result. And right now, it seems like there's a strong effort to keep everyone in the same environment, which kind of creates a sense of less safety and comfort and belonging. So in that sense, maybe expanding the use of it can help all kinds of schools, all the schools.
So I think there's a few things that so there's about probably 20 spaces that aren't filled, right, at Phoenix. So there still isn't, that's not very many for a district with 6 secondary schools. So I think that we want to try to mirror, how do we make all of our, how do we bring what Phoenix is doing? I think part of what is really important around what they're doing is that it isn't something that's so mind-blowing, that they really just have the time and attention and mindset. That's part of what comes out of time and time again when we spend time at Phoenix, is that the mindset of the teachers really is just so welcoming, to kind of bring that welcoming and affirming environment that we talk about to life. So that's part of the reasoning when we're thinking about the profile too, is that it isn't just any student that's exhibiting a behavior. We want to be really careful of that. There's some history around previous programming when it was Bridges, that there was sort of a combination of students who really struggled with anxiety and then some more externalizing maybe behaviors. And so we know that combination didn't always work. Not that there's no behavior challenges at Phoenix, but that it's coming from a different place. So really being mindful around, just because maybe you're struggling, that we're really taking the time to hear around the interventions that have taken place and sort of the rationale, versus it feeling like, oh, you're not working here, we need you to go there. So I think, not that we don't want to expand the intervention, but really thinking about being mindful still around the intervention itself and who it's serving.
Mrs. Farmer? Microphone.
Could you also attribute the welcoming and the whole idea of Phoenix to the student-teacher ratio within that building? So if we were to expand something like that, we'd be looking at a similar okay, thank you.
Mr. Bonagoro?
Promised last question, Mr. President. The teachers, I'm just kind of guessing that maybe there's a special fit, but maybe there's not. Is there something unique that you're looking for in recruiting teachers for Phoenix?
So what's interesting is that teachers who have been there are sort of a mix. So there's veteran teachers who've been there for the entirety of the program since they were in the mall years ago, and newer teachers that maybe are newer to the district, and that's where the opportunity was. But we were just talking prior to the presentation that really what came out from listening to staff is like when you're there, that you really want to be there. So our transfer rate is pretty low from the program. I don't know the last time that we've even had one. So really the staff who are there really want to be there and they're choosing to stay because they certainly have the seniority where they could choose to transfer out, but yeah, are there from year to year. So I think it's just really the willingness to be there and seeing the value and the difference that they're making.
Somebody described that they are like jujitsu masters, where they can diffuse the conflict before it even sort of solidifies. And, there wasn't a lot of, I didn't see any power struggles when we were there observing between the teachers and the students. And it may, from sort of a traditional standpoint, seem unusual because it wasn't that students didn't blow up and wanted to walk out of the building, or not the building, but the room. But one of the things that students said was that, but they didn't make a big deal out of it, that I could actually come back instead of in some other settings, it would be a big deal, and then I would feel ashamed to come back in front of the whole class, to the whole class. So that's sort of the jiu-jitsu master reference that they made. Wanted to mention, this is what I had forgotten earlier, is that we gave this presentation to all the staff to make sure that they also understood what we found, so that the information was going back to them, including more difficult challenges around, making sure there's communication and also really thinking about attendance and how do you, if you have a great program like this, how do we get more kids whose attendance are lower to come? And then the other piece that came from the teachers was this idea of like inconsistencies also in terms of behavior responses. And so the students said, sometimes they can get away with things that maybe we shouldn't get away with. And we shared that with the staff, and they said, you know what, we're right, you're right, we need to make sure that we don't coddle them into failure. So, the buy-in from the teachers and the staff there in terms of what they heard from the studies was really, really high. And I think that's why when I came back after the summer, because we concluded the study in the spring, and came back in the summer and said, okay, we can talk about it. Oh, they've already started using this to look at their school improvement plans. So, which is nice, because sometimes you do these studies and nothing, there's no impact of it, but you can already see it.
Any other questions? Thank you all very much. Thank you. Moving on to item 4.03, stimulus spending plan update. Assistant Superintendent Clearly.
Thank you. We've got an exhilarating presentation here on stimulus funds, so I hope you're all ready for it. So what we thought we would do tonight is just wrap up a couple of the other stimulus funds in addition to our ARP, or our American Rescue Plan funds. So what I want to touch base, a couple slides just on the CARES Act update that we had funding for, our RSA funding, and then in the ARP update, talk about maybe just as a reminder, just some requirements of the funds, the allocation, the funding process, development process that we used. I have a slide on current staffing, what the budget changes look like, and then the expenditures to date. And last time we did this with the board was March of '22, when we developed that plan and we put a budget out for what we were going to use the funds for in terms of positions for a three-year period. We did an update to that we're going to show this evening. So the CARES Act stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act. It was a federal program approved back in March of 2020. We received about $3.3 million in that year. The caveat to that $3.3 million was it was not an addition of funds to the district, but if you recall, in that particular year, our foundation aid went down by exactly the amount of the federal dollars that we received. So when we got although we were scheduled to receive X amount of dollars in foundation aid, it got reduced by $3.3 million. And then lo and behold, they gave us $3.3 million in federal monies to offset it. so it sort of broke us even. We have to, one of the requirements was that we obligate the funds to be spent by September of '22, and we liquidate the funds by the end of this month. We fully utilized the funds by June of this past school year. And the funds could be used for any items relating to preventing, preparing for, or responding to COVID. So we received $3.3 million. You'll see here we spent $3.283 million, left a balance of about $29,000. And there's a note on the bottom of the screen there indicating that at $29,000, we were required to pass through funds to private and parochial schools. They did not spend their share of this money by the time we reported. We asked if we could absorb those funds back. We cannot. Those funds will need to just stay with the state, and they'll be returned and forfeited to New York State. CRRSA was our second funding source, stands for the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. That was authorized a few months later in December of 2020 for $10.4 million. Again, similar requirements. We have to spend those funds. We have to obligate them by September of '23, close everything out by October 31st, '23. And we could use those for the same purposes as the CARES Act or the ARP funds, including the hiring of new staff or avoiding layoffs. So what we have here is just a chart of where we currently stand with this. So under the column that says original submission, we were on a short, very short timeline. We had about 30 days, less than 30 days, to get this application into the state. And actually, the guidelines hadn't come out until about 20 days before. But we had put into the grant 40 positions, roughly social workers, math interventionists, reading specialists, counselors, and psychologist positions, totaling about $6.7 million, some supplies and materials, and then the related benefits for those positions coming to the $10.4 million. What we've done subsequently, we learned that you can do some capital projects with these funds that are related to COVID. So what we did is made an adjustment, and we pulled out $2.1 million in professional salaries, the related benefits, and we asked the state for an amendment for almost $5 million in order to do some capital projects. Those projects are listed below. So we are looking to replace VCT carpeting that are in the hallways of some schools with VCT flooring at 4 buildings, replace some air handling units for indoor air quality at 4 buildings, replace playgrounds and having them installed at 4 buildings, and then equipping our equipment, our fitness rooms at our high school campuses, totaling almost $5 million. Just as a side note, we notified today that we did receive approval on that amendment. So we'll be able to start the process on getting those completed. And then under the revised submission, you can see it's the same dollar amount. We just wanted to be able to show what the change was and what we're using those funds for. ARP stands for the American Rescue Plan Stimulus Funds. Again, 3 months after the CRRSA, we got this notification in March of 2021 that we were going to receive $24.8 million. It's to be spread over a 3-year period, which will conclude with the 23-24 school year. We have to obligate those funds by September of '24, but we have to liquidate them all by the next month, October 31st. Federal guidelines on these funds, just as a reminder, there was a learning loss and a remediation grant portions of this $24.8 million. They totaled about $7 million, must be spent on evidence-based programs such as summer school, summer enhancement, extended day, and so on. The remaining balance, the $17.8 million, Again, can be used for similar types allowed in the CARES Act, repair or improve schools, improve indoor air quality, educational technology, mental health services, summer learning or after-school programs, and the caveat, the one that I've underlined here, other activities necessary to maintain operations of and continuity of services, including to employ existing or hiring new district staff, which kind of translates for us into recruitment and retention type of expenditures during that period of time, and to kind of reformat us for going forward as well. On top of the federal guidelines, New York State decided to throw a few more guidelines. If that wasn't restrictive enough, has to be spent on maximizing instructional time in person. You can purchase educational technology. You've got to address the impact of the pandemic on on students interrupted by the pandemic and certain subgroups. You have to address social, emotional, and mental health and academic needs, offer evidence-based programs, and allowed to support early childhood education. So this is kind of how the grant breaks down, $24.8 million. The base grant is really the combination of the first two. It's about $22.2 million, but there's this requirement that you have to spend 20% of the base grant on learning loss. That equates to $4.4 million of the base grant must be spent on learning loss, in addition to the $1,854,000 for learning loss, and then there's a 1% requirement for summer program and after-school activities. Must spend this $2,595,000 at a minimum. Those amounts need to be spent in those specific areas. All portions of the grant have been approved by SCD for us. So I just wanted to go through quickly how we got to where we were with our budget. So we developed the plan and an outline of the plan components that needed to be satisfied. We focused obviously on 5-day in-person learning and addressing student needs. We obtained significant stakeholder input from parents, students, and staff through a variety of climate surveys. We solicited about 150 proposals from district staff, cabinet, and an external consultant. We sat through all 150 proposals, kind of prioritized them to develop a plan. We wrote the plan out. We sent it to SCD. It's been approved. The challenge with this grant is things change all the time. So the last point makes the fact that as things change and new programs are added, or something might be ceased, or we find another need, we need to go back and do a budget amendment with SCD in order to line up the expenditures with the way that they approve it for us. But again, we have to address student needs during anything that we implement. When we put the plan together, priorities are what you see here: return to 5-day learning, expansion of mental health and behavioral health teams, provide targeted interventions to support the learning loss gaps, and develop key programs in the buildings for before school, after school, and other programs during the breaks. Sort of the history. So this is what our ARP funding currently houses for positions as of September 30th. This has already changed. This changes fairly frequently. But currently, we have 86.4 positions funded through ARP. And you can see I've included here the original budget. When we budget for, as we're putting the plan together, we use averages for certain positions. The budget had come out to just under $5.1 million. When we filled all these positions, and these are positions that are primarily all filled, when we filled them and people have moved to their actual salaries, we had a trend where folks that were in, say, the general fund wanted the positions that were in ARP, so they applied and were put into those positions. The actual salaries turn out to be about $5.7 million. When you add benefits on top of that at about 30%, for retirement, FICA, healthcare, all those other types of things, it's just over $7 million right now being funded for 86 positions out of ARP as of September 30th. So that's just a quick snapshot of what's in there. What I attempted to do in these next couple slides is give an update to what we had presented back in March. So in March, the slides looked very similar to this. The black numbers are what we reviewed with the board in March. The blue numbers are the update as of September 30th. So I'll work through one of these, and then we can move through the other two fairly quickly. So what we're looking at here is in 21-22, we had a lot of vacancies. We had just learned, we had just created the plan, weren't sure how this was going to go. A lot of positions remained unfilled. So I put a note on that one for each of the slides that they were unfilled, so we didn't try to do any real update on that. But I do have a slide on what we've currently spent to date to be able to give you an idea of what the volume is there. But we did take a look at 22-23 for the current year and next year, and where are we to date, and how do we look in terms of spending the funds in the pace required to meet spending all the money by September of '24. So school counselors, the first line, we originally budgeted for three school counselors in ARP for each of those school years. We still have 3. That's what's updated in the blue. MTS coach, we budgeted 1, we have 1. And you can see that going down. When we get to social workers, we had budgeted 12 for each of the 3 years. We currently have 14. The behavior specialist per budget. We have a behavior interventionist that originally wasn't in the plan, but we do have one now. We're planning on that position being there for 22-23 and 23-24. When you get to the total FTEs, originally budget was 20 positions. We're currently at 23 positions. The salary numbers are beneath it. So if you take 22-23, we budgeted $1,246,000. Those positions are going to actually cost us somewhere around $1,726,000. Add the benefits to it, just over $2 million for 22-23. Similarly, $2.1 million for 23-24, compared to the black numbers that are on the left-hand side. The number on the far right, the $4,215,000, represents the budget for 22-23, 23-24 updated. So if we stay where we are, we will spend $4.2 million for 23 positions under mental and behavioral health supports. Good? Similarly, under learning loss, same format, same blacks are the original, blues are the update. Assistant principals are 5. Instructional interventionists, we had planned on putting in 11. There are no instructional interventionists funded through ARP at this time. Building interventionist, we had planned on 5.2. We've actually got 14.5 in there. And I believe those are TOSAs, TOSA positions. Language development specialist, 8. We've continued on with that. Teacher reading, English, you can see. So teacher building substitutes. Originally, and you'll see this on a forthcoming slide, we had budgeted for substitute teaching within ARP on a daily basis. However, that plan had changed. We actually placed 20 full-time daily substitutes in each of the buildings. So those 20 positions were not actually FTE positions at the time. They thought we'd just be substitutes that we call in on a daily basis. However, the plan changed and said we're better off having Romeo show up every day at a particular building, knowing there will be vacancies at every building every day during this period of time. So we created 20 and placed them in there. In our TOSA positions, teachers on special assignment, we had planned on 5. We actually have 10.5. So the plan was to have 34.7 positions for learning loss for about $2,186,000. We currently have 58.7 positions for $3,525,000. And you can see again, the numbers increased a little to account for a 3 or 3.5% increase in rates for 23-24. Summer work pay, way overestimated what we thought we would be spending there. We spent about $20,500 for summer work pay. Teacher extra time, we spent about $185,000. And the benefits, you can see, $933,000. $4.6 million is what we're figuring on spending for 22-23, and $4,975,000 for 23-24, for a total of $9.6 million over the next 2 years. And then we grouped everything else under other. You can see some positions that we had planned for, we hadn't filled. We had planned for 7.8 positions. We are currently at 4.7 positions. You can see the numbers here. Over the next 2 years, again, for the 2-year total is $684,000 that would be budgeted, pretty close to what we had originally planned. And then on the bottom is a 21-22 only cost, was the attendance incentive for retention and recruitment. We had planned, thought, budgeted for approximately $5 million in expense. We're going to end up somewhere around $4.7 million in expense for that program. You don't see it in the other years because it is over its sunset on June 30th, 2022. That was budget. So we did staffing, we did budget, and then this is just a slide on what have we spent to date in ARP through September 30th. We've so far spent $10,234,000 of the $24.8 million. The largest items in there are salaries, obviously. There's a lot of positions in there. That $7.2 million does include the salaries for the attendance incentive, which was about $4 million, so that is included in there. Contracted services, $783,000. Just some big-ticket items to give you kind of a sense of what was in there. One was this wasn't a large item, but it was an important item, fingerprint costs. So we made the decision, in order to recruit, we've got to take away that obstacle of having folks having to pay $105 or $106 to have their fingerprints done. We went ahead and are picking up those costs within ARP. So far, we spent about $26,000 on it. Not a lot of money, but it has been very effective in recruiting folks to the district. Well Now, if we call Well Now, were the nursing folks that we had to come in to do the daily testing for those folks that were not vaccinated. That was a good $277,000 we spent with them. We spent some $40,000 with the curriculum associates. We spent another $55,000 on ImmuWare, which was the tracking software we needed to keep track of all the folks that were getting tested and where they were and when they could come back and all those types of things. Beneath that, you'll just see the benefit costs for FICA, TRS, health insurance, supplies and materials, typical type things, teacher work, some conference money. Again, we spent $10.2 million to date. On this last slide, what we tried to do is just kind of compare where we were to where we are. And are we on track to spend these funds? So on the left-hand side, you see what we presented back in March was the original budget. 20 positions for $4.7 million for mental and behavioral health. Learning loss, 34.7. 62.5 positions for $24.8 million. Well, where are we now? As of September 30th, we're 23 positions for mental health, And if you add up those two numbers I kept referring to back here to the right, the 9.6 and the 4.2, we will have spent $4.2 million on mental health. We've got 58.7 positions in learning loss for 9.6 million, 4.7 positions now instead of 7.8 for other support for $684,000. Plus you add in what we've already spent to date, the 10,234,000, we will hit the $24.8 million to be spent by the end of the 23-24 school year under this plan. And below that, you can just see the percentages of, in the pie chart, they're roughly the same. They're within the same ballpark.
Questions? Mr. Farmer?
Thank you, Romeo. Out in the middle of the room, right, when this money's gone. What are we anticipating? Do we have any, I'm thinking attrition, and then it's like, well, wait a minute, attrition. These last people, yeah.
That is it is a long answer that I don't have right now. And it gets complicated. We talk about how we're going to do this once a week, at least for a couple hours, and it changes. And we've recently brought it with cabinet. We've shared this presentation and the fact that we got to start thinking about what are we doing with these 86 positions? How are we going to transition them? What's it going to cost? What can we afford? How many can we afford? Which ones do we want? How do we decide which ones we want? You know, can we, what's the state going to look like? So we know for the current year, we received a foundation aid increase of $15.5 million, which has been helpful because we were able to add back roughly 50 positions, maybe it was less, 40 positions to the general fund up through the current budget that we had cut 5, 6, 7 years earlier. And for next year, we're anticipating another $15.5 million foundation aid increase, which should, and then this is where it gets tricky, should be able to afford all the positions that we currently have to roll over in the general fund, plus some of the positions that are in ARP. Where it gets complicated is you don't know the next year, what is the state going to give us for a foundation aid increase? Now, there's two sides of this fence. One is you can probably plan on 2%, 3% a year. There's another theory that by the time 24, 25, and 25, 26 comes around, with all the funds that are being dispersed through New York State, will they have enough to actually pay what they promised they would pay? And nobody knows what 25, 26 is going to look like. So we go back to look at history, and history says it's not really pretty. You know, they might give us our foundation aid, but then, you know, it's happened before. They take it back through a gap elimination adjustment. And that lasted 5 years last time. So, yeah, we'll give you your 103 that you're due, but now we're going to take back 7. And we'll give you your 103, but we're going to take back 4. And we're going to give you, and without knowing, we're going to plan this strategically on how many what positions can we bring back, how much will they cost us. We'll do some projecting on 4 and 5 years out under a couple different scenarios with foundation aid. And then we'll also put together a strategy around reserves. You know, so how, in reserves is a tool, and it'll be helpful to use. They won't last forever. You can't operate a district on reserve funding, no matter how much it is. It's very similar to your household. You might have a nice savings account, but if you're dipping into it to run your household every year within 5, it's not gonna be there. Then what do? You haven't addressed the problem. So we have a lot of discussions around how are we going to address that. And myself and my team are putting together options to share with cabinet, and then we'll share with extended cabinet, start putting things together and start making some decisions, I think, and we're hoping, for the 23-24 school year. Start strategizing and start planning what we want to do.
I'm sure you're on it, just wanted to, yeah.
Ms. Flores?
Tracy stole my thunder. But I have to believe that it was a similar question that everybody would have on the board. And there's other factors that also boil into this. I mean, if the administration changes, if our student
Yes.
headcount goes down, we will not get the same amount of funding. There's just so much going, and it's not like those needs are going to go away in 3 years.
Correct. Agreed.
So it's just
We've done very preliminary enrollment projections. We're seeing a slight decline, but nothing really significant. But any decline in enrollment will, I mean, foundation aid is given on a per pupil basis. So every kid that we don't enroll is, I forget what that number is, but it's $15,000, $20,000 that we don't get, whatever that number is. So a significant decline in enrollment will equate to less foundation aid, not just for that year, but for going forward as well. So we're trying to use projections, plus what we know, workshops that we attend, to develop a 1-year, 2-year, and a 3-year. I think we can do fairly well. It's when you get into years 4 and 5, you're just too far out to know where anything's going to be.
Can you also comment on how the tax assessments of the town and the money that we collect, that the school district runs on, assessments go up, and we all know that the entire town's going to be assessed this year. So how does that play into it for people to understand? Will that create extra revenue for us? Does that change our tax base? How does that apply?
It does not. So when we set the tax levy, and I'll try to do this briefly, the tax levy is set based on what we review every year, is the tax cap calculation, excuse me. And the tax cap calculation has a number of variables in it. And whether it's state aid, or I shouldn't say state aid, but foundation aid specifically, or some of these other factors that we talked about tonight won't impact that calculation. The levy will remain the levy. Now, if assessments were to go up 1%, 5%, 25%, whatever that is, it does not impact the levy. It only impacts the tax rate that everybody will pay. And again, I'll just do that again. If our levy is $100 million that comes out of the tax cap calculation, and that is certified, we do that, it's reviewed by the auditors. The levy says we're going to have a tax cap of no more than $100 million. And the assessments come in and went up very significantly. The way the tax rate is calculated, it's the levy divided by the assessments. So if the levy stays at 100 million and the assessments go up significantly, the tax rate comes down. If the tax assessments stay the same, the rate will probably stay. If the tax assessments went down, the rate would go up significantly. But it has nothing to do with any of the stimulus monies, tax rates based on the assessments. The budget is based on the tax levy.
Thank you.
So we know what the tax levy is going to probably be. What we don't know is what we're about 50-50 state aid versus tax levy. We know what 50% of the budget's going to be for revenues. We don't know entirely what the state aid portion is going to be 3 years from now. But we know what we got this year. We know what we're going to get next year, because I think it'll happen. It's the year after that gets a little gray.
Ms. Farah?
Same question.
Mr. Sawicki?
So I had the same question, but I guess clarification on, Romeo, something you said around just the building substitutes, right? That we chose to make that decision to bring those FTEs on, right, to swap out what would have been paid as a daily rate with the other substitutes. Is that a pseudo silver lining here, that we would have had that in our general fund to begin with? And I know it's not dollar for dollar swap, but is that something that, like, we don't have to go find in '24 because it would have been there
Well,
as part of our
we
run rate?
budget, if I'm understanding it correctly, we budget somewhere around $1.8 million, $1.7 million for substitutes. we will continue to budget $1.7 million or $1.8 million. If we bring over those 20 positions, that will be an add, because that will be in addition to the $1.7 million, I think it was 550 or 600,000.
So
You know,
no
whether
second
we
line.
would take $1.5 million and say, oh, we're only going to budget $1 million now and substitute that. That substitute budget number has been as high as $2.2 million in some years. So conservatively, we probably wouldn't. We would probably, those subs would be an add, but we could look at it.
Got it. Thank you.
Dr. Traywick?
I wanted to go back to something you said regarding our contracted services. Where are we with our, I know we were very top-heavy with our bus contracts, you know, contracted drivers a few years back. And I just wondered with all the new hires that we have coming on, has that decreased what we're contracting out or how?
No.
No?
The amount we have contracted out is actually higher this year than what it has been in the past year or two. The reason, we're still short drivers. So I don't have the numbers exactly right, but I'll just to make the point, we may have 170 routes that we were driving ourselves, but we only had 150 drivers. Actually, last year, we had probably 15 fewer, so we were short. And every day, parents would get calls, school's going to be delayed an hour and a half, school's going to be delayed 2 hours, because we had to wait for our drivers to get back on the bus, to go make the next run, to pick up the delays. We decided this year, we cannot have that happen. So what we did is gave Ontario Bus, we know we got we have 150 drivers and a small sub list plus the office staff. So we said, we're gonna drive on our buses 150. We're gonna give the other routes to Ontario. So we gave them more routes for them to fill and to deal with, because we could not. So they actually got more routes. As we get more drivers during this year, which we anticipate we will do, the contract allows us to take back routes from Ontario Bus. So if we grab another 5 drivers, we can go back to Ontario, give them 30 days' notice, and say, we're going to take back 6 or 7 routes from you. Our contract will come down. That's the hope, is that our goal is to have all our routes, we will never get away from zero contract transportation. We don't even have the buses, we don't even have the parking spaces to put 275 buses. We will always have some private contract transportation, but our goal would be to have like 20, 25 routes with them, not 50. Does that help you?
Any other questions? Dr. Traywick?
Okay, so this is a question regarding 2 of the titles that are listed here. Behavior intervention and building intervention.
Yeah. I hate doing this, but I am going to have to call a colleague on this one.
And I'll do my best too, and if my colleagues can help me out. So behavior interventionist would be more on the mental health support services work world. Building interventionist would be more in the instructional world, whether that's a reading specialist or more instructional in nature.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mike.
Dr. Traywick?
This is more of an HR question regarding, since we know that there is this large possibility that we might have to pull back on some of the positions. What is the conversation like as you are bringing people on and, these new positions? Are we even having a conversation with them that, not that it's temporary, but, this is what the forecast is? And maybe that's not even smart to do, I don't know. I'm just thinking, from a perspective of, just being transparent, that we may not have the funding, but then when we take it down, I don't know. But I'm just wondering, are we even thinking that way, or are we just remaining hopeful that the state's gonna give us what they promised?
don't you go ahead and then I'll add if you don't hit it. Go ahead, please, thank you.
So what you saw in that list of positions, there's a variety. So some of them, when you look at TOSAs, those are internal people. So those people are brought on, and typically a TOSA knows that that's a year-to-year position that when they accept that. But they also know that they have a position back in the district somewhere. So then you're hiring somebody to fill that position. So if they were an elementary teacher, they became a building interventionist, we would backfill that. And you can't necessarily have that conversation with the person you backfilled, because if that TOSA was to go back into the classroom, if that was a position that we eliminated, let's say, and that person went back into that position, the TOSA, the person that could possibly be cut wouldn't necessarily be that person anymore, because it's on the seniority list. So there's no way to have a direct correlation when you're talking about some of the TOSA positions. On the other end, there's some direct hires when you're looking at social worker. Those are new positions that come in. And I don't think, to your point, that the conversation is that these are temporary positions, because we don't know what positions are temporary and what positions are not. So we are not having those direct conversations. I don't think we have enough information to say that. But I will say internally, when people take on some of the TOSA positions, they're typically going in with the understanding that this is not a permanent position, but they have a guaranteed position within the district when they return, and then there's kind of a snowball effect. So depending on what positions, are eliminated or they go back into the classroom, what you'll see is, you could be, a backfill could be at Longridge Elementary School, but it could impact somebody over at Buckman Heights. If that makes sense.
Yep.
Any other questions? I just have one question and then a comment. I'm assuming it's the same process with the programs as it is with the staffing. We're evaluating the programs, the extra
Yes.
programs, the extra things we're doing, whatever it may be. We're gonna go through that same process with cabinet, extended cabinet, then obviously come back to the board at
Yes.
some point. And I'm just so glad that by 2024, all our learning loss is gonna be better.
It's going to be gone.
I'm really happy about that we're gonna be in a good position in 2024, because everything's gonna be fixed. We're gonna fix everything, so that's great.
And-
Thank
and-
you very much.
And I will add, that's one of the options, right? So, like you said, ideally, if you cut this black and white, you'd say 2024, everything's got to go back to normal. I'm going to guess, and this is just my thinking on this, that some of those positions probably need more time to really tell whether they've been effective or not. But what's more time? So if it was, say, some of those positions we wanted to keep on for another year, I think we could do that through some adjustments in the budget, and/or we go to reserves for a one-time pull to pay for those positions for an extra year and see where we are. But at some point, we're not going to be able to, we can delay it, I think, for maybe a year and a half, maybe even two, if we did it creatively. But at some point, we've got to address all those positions. And we know that, and we're going to come up with plans or some options on how to possibly do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. We're
Thank
gonna take a
you.
5-minute recess. All right, we're back from our brief recess. Moving on to item 5.01, change orders. Can I somebody move change orders to the table, please? Moved by Mrs. Farmer, seconded by Vice President Malora. Any comments, questions, concerns on change orders? The only comment I'll make is that the change orders amount to approximately $63,000, $63,859. With that, all those in favor of the change orders? Anyone opposed? That passes 8-0. 5.02, quarterly reporting of professional service contracts greater than $50,000 for 22-23. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Flora, seconded by Mr. Swicky. Any comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes 8-0. Moving on to business budget and revenue status report. That's written information only. Anybody have any questions? Moving on to quarterly reporting of service contracts exceeding $20,000 but less than $50,000 for 22-23. Anybody have any questions on that? All right, moving on to 6.03, anticipated bids. Anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns on that? Moving on to the consent agenda. Can I somebody move the consent agenda to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Swicky, second by Mr. Bonagorio. Any comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes 8-0. Moving on to 10.01, bus driver training discussion. Board member, Mrs. Farah.
Hi, yes, I'm actually, I'm curious on people's discussion regarding this. This only came to mind only because this was about 4 years ago. The district was in dire need of bus drivers, and I was a stay-at-home mom. I decided to do that, and I noticed that I could take the course given by Greece, and I actually didn't even have to get employed by Greece. I could just take my CDL and go anywhere I wanted to. So I'm just curious, do we have a plan or a policy in place, or what does it look like? I know it's been mentioned to the board a few years back. I just kind of wanted to bring it back again to see if there's any conversation regarding the district pays for the course, and I apologize, I don't even know how much the course is at this point. Can anyone answer that?
Dave, can you go to a microphone, please? Mr. Richardson will help us out here.
As far as a course, they need to get their CDL permit first. All right, we do not pay for the CDL permit. We do not pay for their time to study to get the permit. The permit is actually 4 tests that you need to take at the DMV. We will schedule the permit tests for a candidate, but we do not start training them until they provide us a valid and successful CDL permit. Once they come on board, we do train them. I wouldn't say it's a course, it's a series of on-the-job training inside a bus, practicing maneuvers, the road skills, as well as reviewing safety tutorials to prepare them. That takes about 6 weeks, and they're paid minimum wage. Once they receive their CDL and successfully pass their road test, then they come aboard, they become a Teamster member if they choose, and they get the rate per the Teamsters contract. So as far as a course, it's a series of tutorials and trainings and on-the-job practice.
So they're basically employed the whole entire time while they're taking the course, even though it's a rate of such, then they get the higher once they're done. I guess a lot of people are under the understanding of something completely different that has been brought to me. So that's the only reason why. We've heard that when they're paying for these, like I said, the courses and whatnot. So if that is the actual case, then that's great, and the district's not losing any money. Because as a business stance, that if we were just, say, the course was $250 from my perspective is what they were saying, and all of a sudden they're walking out the door, how many people are leaving, getting their course permit and such, and leaving and going to, say, First District that pays $2 more an hour or less, or what that all is?
So some data I can give you is this. Over the last 3 years, we have hired 86 drivers. 66 of those drivers are still with us. Of the 20 that we lost, 5 of them have gone to competitors. Okay? So, but we've also gained about 10 people from competitors. So that's true for teaching, it's true for food service secretaries, it's true for any position. Do we lose people to competitors? Sure. Of the 5 that we lost, 2 were for residence reasons. So 1 went to Brockport because they moved, and 1 went to Palmac because they moved out there. So I understand that a little bit more than going to Ontario. We lost 2 people to Ontario and 1 to RTS. So when I look at that, 3 to competitors, I don't see that as a significant loss. I mean, I'd love it if they were here, but 3 out of 86, I'll take it.
Okay, well, that's good, as long as that's stipulated for the record, so that is closed, and there's nothing,
Yeah.
if anyone else, I don't know how, anyone else has got any more?
If anybody else wants to comment, I have just a question. It's contractual, correct? I mean, like, we would have to negotiate with Teamsters if we were gonna establish some type of a requirement after they successfully complete the CDL, correct?
So
I mean, if
what
we
they are
wanted them
not,
to stay for like a year, like we've done
Right.
that with other contract, or with other
Right.
people.
That
they
would have to be
commit a
negotiated.
district, But
Right.
you'd have to negotiate.
right,
with
so
Teamsters.
really, one of the things that Romeo and I talk about is retention. So to your point, Megan, can someone get their CDL and leave the next day to go to a neighboring district? In theory, yes. Doesn't look good for them, obviously, and we have a close relationship with all the transportation directors in the county, and we're supporting one another. I don't want to steal a driver from Spencerport like Spencerport doesn't want to steal one from me. Has it happened? Yes. Has it happened a lot? No. Same with teachers. But the other thing is we're paying them that minimum wage. So we want to see that investment. We want to see that commitment in that 6 to 8 weeks that it takes to earn your CDL prior to taking the road test. So, we lose more people that are intimidated by, oh my gosh, I have to go to the DMV and take 4 tests. That permit test, or tests, because it's plural, is pretty intimidating. And for about every 20 people that apply to us to become a driver, more than half we don't see because they don't get beyond that. But we've lost 0 money.
Good.
Okay, as far as reimbursements, candidates are paying for their SED fingerprints. Once they come to us with a successful CDL permit, it's $102. We do reimburse them immediately. A discussion that I've had with Romeo is maybe we hold that for 6 months or some kind of milestone and reimburse them at a certain milestone. That would have to be negotiated as well. But then when they earn their CDL, they have to pay for a second set of prints with DMV, and that's $106. So $208, is that enough to hold over their head to stay? Possibly, possibly not, but the amount of people that we lose is minimal and comparable to any other position in Greece.
Okay, good, good.
Any other discussion, comments, questions? Mr. Bonagora? No, we're only talking about this.
I'm always lost.
Yep, no problem. All right, with that, can I get a motion to adjourn? Ms. Farmer, seconded by Ms. Flores. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes 8-0. Thank you.